Mark, sometimes you don't need analytical data to tell you the story. Just look at the situation, find the trend, and make the decision.
Tyler Boyd's dip in production last year better correlates with Andy Dalton being off the field than it does with A.J. Green being off the field, despite public perception.
You can't watch just highlight film because highlight film only shows the good things. Watch the player's actual game tape because you see the good and the bad.
In 7 games in 2018, where all 3 starting Rams receivers were healthy, Brandon Cooks led the trio in targets, receptions, receiving yards, and total PPR points by a considerable margin.
It's a beautiful day for football. Welcome into the RotoBros Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Chris McConnell.
I'm Mark Wemkin.
And you know who we are. We are the RotoBros. Mark, we've got a great episode for everybody tonight, but before we get started, we got to let everybody know, where can they find you?
They can find me at Mark Wemkin on Twitter. That's first name, last name. Chris, where are we going to find you, man?
You can find me at Mind of McConnell on Twitter. That's at Mind of McConnell. You can also find both of us at FSA Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis on Facebook. Just go to Facebook, type in FSA Fantasy, the fastest growing, most active fantasy sports community on the planet. We kid you not. You can find everything, for the most part, that Mark and I will post, that we'll share. Everything that we think up from our minds will be spewed into FSA. So come check us out. Again, that's FSA Fantasy. Type that into the search bar on Facebook. Go ahead and join today, and we will personally accept your request. Mark, we have an excellent show for everybody, as promised. Episode 4 of the RotoBros is about to get underway, but what are we going to be talking about tonight?
Well, Josh Gordon shocked the entire industry on Friday. Twitter was a madhouse.
Oh.
FSA was a madhouse. Everybody wants to know what this means with Josh Gordon getting reinstated. There's a lot of data to dive through here. I don't think people realize how good Josh Gordon was when he was playing with the Patriots. But with that in mind, we do have a lot more to talk about outside of that. Chris, we talked about your rankings a lot on the last podcast, so we're going to talk about mine today.
It's your turn.
Yeah. It's my turn. Let me talk for a change, huh? Anyway, we're going to talk Mark's rankings. We've got a lot. Me and Chris have some discrepancies with our rankings. There's guys that I'm insanely high on that he doesn't necessarily like, vice versa. So we're going to talk about guys like Baker Mayfield, OBJ, Dalvin Cook, Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida, Miles Sanders, Tyler Boyd, Vance McDonald. We've got a full-fledged show for you today. So Chris, let's get to work, man.
Let's do it. Okay, so first up is obviously the biggest news, in my opinion, of the offseason, but it dropped this weekend that Josh Gordon.Mark is fully reinstated. He can join the team, he can practice with the team, and he can join the team and will likely be on the field week 1 for the New England Patriots. Now, how long he will be on the field, that's the $1 million question. Before we start discussing like where we've got him and where we have him ranked and where we're going to take him in the draft, first of all, what do you see from him? Do you think he's going to be? Is he a guy that you should be able to finally rely on and trust?
There's just no way for sure to know one way or the other with Josh Gordon. It's not like he's dealing with extensive injury history. He's dealing with some real personal problems, and I really don't want to dive into those, quite frankly, because none of us truly know what is going on or what has gone on with Josh Gordon in the past as far as the drug incidents and the suspensions and everything. I'd like to...
He's an addict. We'll keep it at football, just like we always promise.
Fair enough. And yeah, we can keep it with football. The thing is, when Josh Gordon was on the field with Tom Brady was a noticeably more efficient quarterback. In 11 games with Josh Gordon on the field, you're looking at 8.16 yards per attempt for Tom Brady. You take Josh Gordon off the field in those 5 games, 6.35 yards per attempt. Nearly 2 yards per attempt more with Josh Gordon on the field. That is a notorious difference at the end of the day.
Yeah, and look, this is a guy, he wasn't targeted more than 5 times in a game until week 5. And that was only his second game with the Patriots. So over the next 9 games, Josh Gordon had caught something along the lines of like 37 of 64 targets. And he caught 669 yards and 3 touchdowns. And that was on pace, Mark, for a 1,200-yard mark at better than 10 yards a target. So and he was doing all this, joining that complex Patriot system that we always talk about for receivers and running backs in the middle of the season. Okay, and that just goes back to the type of talent that he possesses and really his football IQ that he has. Again, he just has to stay on the field. And some numbers from that, a lot of other people talk all the time about target share and targets that are missed when somebody or that are available when somebody disappears. We talk about it with the Steelers losing Antonio Brown and things of that nature. And we talk about it with the Bucks losing Adam Humphries. But we got to talk about it with the Patriots because you've got 72 from Gronkowski that are gone, 55 from Hogan, and 28 from Cordero Patterson to replace. And we've seen, you just talked about the efficiency of Josh Gordon with Brady and vice versa. He's not going to need a ton of targets to be productive. He's almost like the wide receiver version of Kenyon Drake. He doesn't need a bunch of targets and touches to be productive, especially because he's really the only true deep threat on that team. And I want to get to something real quick. Chris Towers of CBS Sports wrote a piece earlier this weekend as soon as this news dropped. He said, let's sort of close our eyes and imagine this for a minute. Edelman gets 135 to 40 targets and stays that number one target all season long. And Gordon settles in with 120 to 125. At last season's catch and yards per target rate, that's 72 catches for close to 1,300 yards. And if you extrapolate that out, that's a hypothetical line of 72 catches, 1,300 yards, and almost between 8 to 10 touchdowns. That was good enough for wide receiver 13 last season. So this is a guy that, again, he doesn't need to catch 10 balls a game to be productive. He is going to make an instant impact, and it is even bigger, I think, with Rob Gronkowski out of the mix, because without Gronk, we saw 3 examples last year when he played without Gronk. 4 catches on 100 yards on 7 targets. 5 catches, 130 yards, 1 touchdown on 9 targets, and 4 catches, 81 yards on 12 targets. So I've got him as wide receiver 14. I don't think that's obtuse. I know you have him a bit lower. What are your thoughts on all this?
My biggest thing is don't overpay for Josh Gordon, but he's not somebody you want to completely fade. I have him slotted in right now at wide receiver 36. I like him there. I'm comfortable taking him there. My only thing is with all of this news and all of this hype, I'm probably not going to get him on a ton of my teams. Fortunately, for one of my dynasties and several of my best ball teams, I did have the foresight to take him with a last round pick, hoping that he was going to come back.
Yeah, that's excellent.
Yeah, there's plenty of upside. There is a ton of upside. Virtually no floor. We know in years past that Josh Gordon's floor is essentially 0. So you can't reach for him. I wouldn't get too aggressive with him, but he needs to be on your radar as a potential value if he's still on the board in, say, the 6th or 7th round.
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. I was just going to say, where the next question is, where are we going to draft him? Because that's where everybody wants to know. What round are we going to draft him? And I'll be honest with you, Mark, that's a question that I have traditionally not liked. Because again, where should I draft this player? I understand the logic behind it, but it's also very subjective based on really the type of player you are and your thoughts. And not only that, but the other 10, 11 people playing with you as well. So to me, the way I like to put it is, where on your team would you like to have Josh Gordon? Because I can't tell you, oh, you just draft him in this round, because your draft strategy, if you have one going into the draft, may not allow for you to get Josh Gordon at that particular position in the draft. So I like to ask the person who asked me, where on your team, which wide receiver slot would you like to have him at? Wide receiver 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even later than that. To me, I can deal with him as my wide receiver 2. I'll roll that dice this year. I don't want him as wide receiver 1. I prefer him as my wide receiver 3. That's my comfort zone. And look, a lot of people can get him as their wide receiver 4. But if you are talking about the round, you said, I think it was 6th, 7th, 8th round. I think that's perfect. I just saw him go today in a redraft league in the 4th round. And that to me is pretty high. I mean, you got to be even really higher on him than I am. And look, I've got him as wide receiver 14, but I'm not drafting him that high.
No, I wouldn't recommend drafting him that high at all. That was my one thing, is I did start him out. I put him at wide receiver 27 in my rankings. I cooled off a little bit. I thought about it, and I was like, this doesn't seem right. I started playing around with my projections, with pace, with vacated targets. I think 36 is fair. He's right at the end of that wide receiver 3 spectrum. That's where you can get him. I'm completely comfortable there.
But now here's the question that I have posed to you. He plays all 16 games. And this is the thing for me. I believe I'm finally, and this is coming from somebody who's been burned by him in both redraft and dynasty before. I believe that he will play all 16 games finally. Again, I do. I think he will we can finally trust him to do that. There is risk, but that's a dice I'm willing to roll based on where you could probably get him. Surely, though, if he plays all 16 games, okay, or 14 of 16, he's got to outproduce wide receiver 36, right?
If he plays all 16 games, I definitely think he's outperforming where I have him ranked. That's the only problem. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen.
It's such a big risk, right?
Exactly. The range of outcomes for Josh Gordon is still as wide as anybody else's in fantasy football right now.
He might get suspended again tomorrow. That really is the risk you run, and it's really not far fetched to say that he could. And look, I pulled the trigger on him for a couple trades earlier this weekend, one in Dynasty and one in redraft. So I'm rolling that dice, though. I'm going all in, and I'm going to put one final piece of trust into Josh Gordon this year. So that's kind of where we're at, I think, on Josh Gordon. So we're different, but I think we both agree that if he plays probably 13 to 16 games, I mean, this is a guy that's really going to just blow his ADP out of the water. The ceiling, as you said, is very high. And like you mentioned best ball, I think he's a great target in best ball.
Yeah, now I definitely think he's still a decent target at best ball, but I'm extremely adamant about not buying players at their ceiling. I'm adamant about not paying the premium for players. Basically, if you didn't have the foresight to get Josh Gordon, or at least to trade for him or draft him in the last round, there's a good chance you're going to have to reach for him to get him. So that's why now that this news is broken, I'm pretty much off of Josh Gordon. So I'm glad I got some shares while I did before this news broke. So that's kind of where I'm at with him right now.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable with the shares that I got. I've got, I'm in, a double-digit league. So I've got him in, maybe 5 or 6 leagues, and I'm happy with that share. I didn't go all in and just crucify myself to get him, but I did want to have a healthy share of him, I think, without pretty much robbing myself blind and taking on all of that risk in every single league. So, all right, so enough about Josh Gordon. I know hopefully we answered a lot of people's questions about that, and if we didn't, guess what? The mailbag show is actually next week, so you can ask some more questions about Josh Gordon then. So we'll keep that wait on you guys for next week. Mark, let's get to your rankings, because I know there's a lot of stuff that you want to share with everybody. Last week, you kind of went in on me for my rankings. There's some things I need to go in on you for your rankings. So we're going to have some fun with this, because there is a lot we agree on, but there is a lot that the things that it seems like the things that we disagree on to a large extent. It's not like, oh yeah, okay, I think we're 3-4 spots away. It's like, okay, we're 15 spots away.
It's pretty substantial.
It's a pretty substantial change here. So let's get to your rankings here, and we can start with the team up north, the Cleveland Browns, the team that has really been causing a whole lot of offseason storylines. They've probably been stealing most of the storylines up until probably 3 weeks ago when Hard Knocks kicked off for the Raiders. So the Browns have been the NFL's offseason storyline for the most part. Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham Jr. gets traded there. Kareem Hunt. I mean, there's just so much news to go around with this team, and they're very, very talented. Where do you have guys like Baker Mayfield, Odell Beckham, Jarvis Landry, guys like that? Let's talk about that offense that's really getting a lot of pub, and I think they really should, but where do you have these guys going right now?
It looks like I'm above industry consensus on pretty much the entire offense. Baker Mayfield, I'm not too far off. I do have him ranked as QB3.
Whoa.
His ADP right now on Fantasy Football Calculator is quarterback 4. So I actually thought I was higher than the consensus on him, and I'm really not. Here's where I'm at with Baker Mayfield. You look at when Freddie Kitchens took over the offense after Hugh Jackson's firing, 3rd in touchdown passes from Hugh Jackson's firing onward, 2nd in yards per attempt, 4th in passer rating. Now that's from about week 10 onward after Freddie Kitchens took over the offense. To put that into perspective, Ryan Fitzpatrick led the NFL last year with 9.6 yards per attempt. That's ridiculous. And if Baker Mayfield can accomplish something like, funny story, who was Ryan Fitzpatrick's offensive coordinator last year? Todd Monken, Baker Mayfield's offensive coordinator this year. Freddie Kitchens is going to be calling the plays. We know that. But that doesn't mean that Todd Monken is going to be voiceless. He's going to have an effect on that offense. He's going to have an impact. And what him and Freddie Kitchens can cook up together, I honestly think Baker Mayfield has as high a ceiling as any other quarterback in fantasy football this year, and that includes Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, see, here's the thing with me and Baker. I have grown on Baker a little bit. I still want to see a little bit more, but I have grown on him. Look, I've got him as QB 12. I think that is pretty much, I don't think that it is overdoing it. I think QB 2 and 3 is overdoing a little bit for me, but I think it's also not too low. I think that's really a sweet spot to me is QB 10 to 12. I think that's fine. But for me, it's like I can't justify, even with the weapons, I can't justify taking him obviously nobody's going to take him over Patrick Mahomes. Most people won't. But even over a healthy Aaron Rodgers, I can't. I just can't. Deshaun Watson, that's a tough one. It's closer, but that's a tough one for me. I think I'd still lean Watson. Matt Ryan, I don't see how anybody in the world could be comfortable taking Baker Mayfield over Matt Ryan, especially Matt Ryan's got a rebuilt offensive line and should be able to stay upright and get hit a lot less this year. We've seen him at MVP level. Everybody's assuming that Calvin Ridley will take yet another step forward this season. So I don't know how people can't see Matt Ryan as really a top, 3 to 4 quarterback, in my opinion. There's a healthy Carson Wentz. I think we've seen him he was going to be the runaway MVP a couple years ago before he got hurt. So we've seen that happen. Andrew Luck, he's going as QB7 now. Obviously, he's dropping because of his injury. But a healthy Andrew Luck, if he starts week 1, do we really think that Baker's going to outscore him? That's the thing. I mean, I think it's going to be close, and I wouldn't be surprised to see Baker at 7 or 8. But for me, there's just too many options. I think Cam Newton's another one. I think I'm somebody who hasn't been as high on Cam as guys like you have in the past, but I think he's going to get back to normal Cam Newton fantasy level in 2019. So I'm a little bit lower, obviously, on Baker Mayfield. Now with Odell Beckham, we're a little bit closer. You have Odell Beckham, I believe, at a wide receiver 1. So you have him top in the charts. I have him as wide receiver 6 behind Tyreek, Thomas, Julio, DeAndre, and Devontae. Explain the Odell Beckham wide receiver 1. And, of course, Nick Chubb and David Njoku and whoever else on that offense that you're really high on this year.
I'm high on the whole offense. My Baker Mayfield exposure in best ball is ridiculous. I've been trying to get him in the 3rd round of every super flex I can. I think even at his ADP, I think he's a league winner. If there is going to be another breakout quarterback who throws for 40-something touchdowns and nearly 5,000 yards, it's going to be Baker Mayfield. Now, let's compare what Baker Mayfield did from week 10 onward when Freddie Kitchens took over the offense to Patrick Mahomes over that same span. So Patrick Mahomes, 296 dropbacks to Baker Mayfield's 235. That's fair. The Browns ran the football quite a bit more. That being said, Baker Mayfield's ceiling was still ridiculous. 21 touchdowns for Patrick Mahomes to 17 for Baker Mayfield. About 2,200 passing yards for Patrick Mahomes, just shy of 2,000 for Baker. Baker Mayfield had 108.4 passer rating to 110.4 for Patrick Mahomes. This is it. This is the guy that is going to have that second-year breakout similar to what we saw with Patrick Mahomes. If you could go back in time and accurately predict Patrick Mahomes' breakout season, if you could accurately predict him being the QB1, I think you'd be ecstatic. The only thing is, we have something to work on with Baker. With Patrick Mahomes, it was so difficult to project him to predict because we had nothing to work on. We had a 1-game sample to work on. With Baker, there's actually a process to follow to think and find that he could explode. 8.9 yards per attempt over the course of 8 weeks is ridiculous. That was second in the NFL over that span behind just Ryan Fitzpatrick. You add Todd Monken to the mix, you add Odell Beckham Jr. to the mix, and his ceiling is as high as anybody's.
Kareem Hunt, I think we can mention Kareem Hunt at least out of the backfield. I mean, I don't know what you think of Kareem Hunt if he's going to play such a huge role, because that's another thing a lot of people want to know, and we might as well touch on it while we're here talking about the Browns. How is Kareem Hunt going to affect Nick Chubb? Because to me, I've told people you might want to think about selling Nick Chubb as high as you can, maybe trading him for a guy like Kerryon Johnson toward the end of the year if you can sucker somebody into doing that, because, I mean, Kareem Hunt is going to be returning right as you're getting ready for these fantasy playoffs.
With Kareem Hunt, it's really going to depend on what Nick Chubb is doing, how he's doing. If he's flatlining defenses, I don't think there's an incentive to yank him for Kareem Hunt at that point. Everyone knows me. I think Kareem Hunt is a top 5 running back in this league based on talent alone. His production wasn't just Andy Reid. It was a big part of it. He was getting those opportunities in space. But Kareem Hunt is better at making people miss than just about anybody in the NFL. The only 2 guys I would argue are better are Saquon Barkley and Melvin Gordon.
I can't disagree with that. I can't disagree. Seems like a good time to mention Kenyon Drake, who makes people miss in his own right. And everybody knows I love Kenyon Drake. I have to give Kenyon a shout out. His ADP is dropping, and I don't like it. Well, I like it, but it's disrespectful, Mark. It's disrespectful. But we're not talking about Kenyon Drake. We're talking about your rankings. So let's move on. Who else in your rankings do you really want to highlight here? Because there's a lot of stuff that we can touch on, but who else specifically, not just on the Browns offense, but anybody overall? You've got some names on here that you really wanted to highlight, because these are names that a lot of people have not even really mentioned. They've mentioned them, but they're not as big of a discussion piece as I think they should be.
I think we need to be talking about Dalvin Cook as a potential top 5 running back. I have him ranked at RB7. His ADP is right around RB10. This offense could legitimately feature Dalvin Cook as opposed to that passing game in 2019, and I don't think that is being taken into account, especially when people are projecting Kirk Cousins. You look at pass attempts per game about how they dropped when Kevin Stefanski took over the offense. We were looking at 40 pass attempts per game under John DeFilippo, 27 per game over those final 3 games where Kevin Stefanski took over. And it's tough. It's tough to project this offense because we really don't have a big sample size like we do when they were under John DeFilippo. So obviously those wide receivers, they might be taking a step back. I don't think there's any way both of those guys see 150 targets again, and both of those meaning Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen. One or both of those guys are going to take a step back in the volume department. And a big part of that is going to be because Dalvin Cook is going to be ran into the ground if he's healthy. Dalvin Cook is just so talented. He ranked 6th in elusive rating last year. He was 13th in elusive rating in 2017 per Pro Football Focus. We have a good sample size on Dalvin Cook too. He's played 15 career games. He's accumulated just shy of 1,400 yards from scrimmage. He's caught 51 balls and scored 6 total touchdowns. That's about a year's worth of games, and that's mid to high-end RB1 production.
And that's been without an offensive line that's really... It
horrible.
Really hasn't been. Yeah, it's pretty much been horrible. I mean, they had to rebuild it this offseason. So, they're one of those teams like the Falcons and the Bills and the Jets and well, we'll get to the Cardinals here in a little bit. But they're one of those teams that you would imagine have rebuilt their offensive line because they've actually addressed it a good bit. So this is one of the reasons why I'm so huge on the Vikings. A couple weeks ago, they were my Super Bowl winner. I've since adjusted that. I think they do lose to the Philadelphia Eagles in the NFC Championship game, who I do have them winning the Super Bowl. So the Eagles, that is. But I do love this Vikings team as a whole. On that offense, there is no weakness. If, in fact, they have fixed that offensive line, there is no weakness. Now, I'm not as high on Dalvin Cook as I have been on the past. The last 2 years, I actually had him finishing as RB6. I figured he's going to be a top 6 running back, but we just didn't realize how bad that offensive line was and was actually going to continue to be. And so it just didn't work out that way. I've got Dalvin Cook as RB13. I still love the guy. I'm not taking him in the first round. I'll be happy to take him at the end of the second. For me, I'm still taking Melvin Gordon over him because I still think Melvin's going to be on the field. Freeman's a guy I'm taking over him. I love Leonard Fournette this year, so I'm taking Leonard Fournette. David Johnson's another one, of course, and of course Joe Mixon as well. But this is an offense that I'm in love with. I have Kirk at QB9, and I love Steph and Adam Thielen there, both as top 10 wide receivers for me. I think this is going to be a huge year for Kirk Cousins. He's finally getting protected. And I think that is going to come sort of at the expense of Dalvin Cook and Kyle Rudolph. Not so much, though, that Dalvin Cook is rendered useless. I just think he's right outside, just teetering on that RB1. But I think you're right. As long as he's healthy, because that's another key, not just his offensive line blocking. He's got to remain healthy. He's got to remain on the field. And I agree with you. He is going to challenge for strong RB1 upside if he can stay on the field for all 16 games, or at least like 13 of 16, like we mentioned with Josh Gordon. So he's one of those guys that's got to stay on the field, but I agree, he could have a very, very huge year.
Absolutely. And like I said before, I hate analyzing these small sample sizes. Normally, you want to look outward. You don't want to zoom in on a sample size. You want to zoom out on a sample size.
Exactly.
We really don't have a choice here because we can't look at what DeFilippo was conducting with this offense and compare it to what Stefanski was doing and wants to do. With Kevin Stefanski running the offense, Dalvin Cook in 3 games had 10 carries of 10 or more yards. That's ridiculous. 248 rushing yards in just those 3 games alone. He's going to get ran into the ground, and he's so talented. He's so elusive that all the offensive line has to do is just be a touch better than it was last year. It just has to be not awful, and Dalvin Cook is talented enough to do the rest.
Yeah, and there is a name that a lot of people are wondering because a lot of Dalvin Cook owners are trying to handcuff him, and that's with Alex Madison. Now, he's a guy out of Boise State. Look, on tape, coming out in my scouting briefs, I wasn't very big on Alex Madison. I just don't think he's that talented of a football player. However, that doesn't mean that he doesn't have a place in the NFL. I honestly don't think Latavius Murray is that talented of a football player, but he has a place in the NFL, and he's very, very good at what he does. So I think Alex Madison can kind of be that same guy, kind of like a Matt Asiata was back when he had to be given the rock due to injuries or what have you. So I think, not that I'm comparing him to Matt Asiata, but I think he's going to end up having that sort of impact. He's not going to be a great option, but I mean, look, if Dalvin Cook were to go down, and you can scoop up Alex Madison off the waiver wire in free agency, or trade for him for very cheap before a unfortunate injury occurs to Dalvin Cook, or even draft him with the last pick of your league if you end up drafting Dalvin Cook a lot earlier. I think he could potentially be a Band-Aid that you could throw in your RB core if, in fact, you need a guy for injuries or bye weeks or something like that. So Alex Madison, I think, is a guy that people could look at for that emergency potential, that Matt Asiata sort of emergency potential. I don't think he's going to be a guy that produces, at a quality rate, okay, good or bad offensive line, but he's a guy that you could also look at toward the end as well. We just got done talking about, Mark, the Arizona Cardinals, or mentioning them. I told everybody we were going to get to them. We're going to get to them here because we got a couple of things to talk about. Where do we begin? We talked about they're one of the teams that needed to address the offensive line. They didn't really do anything this offseason. They had 5 picks, I think it was 5 or 6 picks in the top 34 or something like that, or 60. I think it was 5 picks in the top 65, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. 64 or 65. Not a single one was used on an offensive lineman, but you had like 2 or 3 used on a wide receiver. That, to me, that logic to me, it's void of all logic. There is no logic. You had the worst offensive line that we have seen in almost a decade, okay, in totality, and they didn't really do anything to address it. We saw that offensive line struggle in the preseason, Mark. And one thing I was telling people in FSA and on Twitter is you can hide. They're not showing everybody everything this offense is going to do. Cliff Kingsbury's not stupid. They're not going to show the entire offense in preseason. But so you can hide that until week 1. You can't hide a bad offensive line. You can't. And Oakland's defense gave people the blueprint on how to attack this offense, at least for right now. And that, to me, is going to affect a lot of people. One of the guys that we definitely want to talk about is David Johnson. How is it going to affect David Johnson? We saw him finish as RB9 last year behind arguably a worse offensive line. What do you see for him? What do you foreshadow for David Johnson in 2019?
It's going to be brutal on the ground, at least. The thing with David Johnson, and like I said with Le'Veon Bell on a previous podcast, I'm not drafting David Johnson to lead the league in rushing. I am drafting him because I think Cliff Kingsbury is going to throw him the football in space. He's going to rack up a ton of catches. He's a 60 or 70 catch guy in Kingsbury's offense, assuming they run as many plays as they want to, or at least close to it. But I'm not looking for that gross rushing production. If he can get to 900 to 1,000 yards on the ground, which would be probably a disappointment for what we're expecting from David Johnson, I'm completely fine with that. As long as he can get me 70 catches and 600 yards through the air, which would be a fantastic season as a receiver for a running back. But that's what I'm expecting to see out of Cliff Kingsbury's offense. Now, you were talking there about the offensive line, which I agree with. That offensive line is atrocious. It looks bad. It looks every bit as bad as it was last year. The good news for David Johnson is they're not going to be able to use as many 4 wide receiver sets as they want to. It's not going to happen. They're going to need a tight end on the field to protect Kyler Murray. That could open up some targets for David Johnson because they're going to need to use him as a receiver. They've got young rookie receivers. They've got Keyshawn Johnson, Andy Isabella, and Hakeem Butler, and that's under Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. These guys are going to take time to develop. None of them are going to smash out of the gate. He's probably going to be third in targets on that team going through the season.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting. Look, again, we mentioned he finished as RB9 last year behind that horrible offensive line that we've, arguably the worst offensive line we've seen in 5 or 6 years. But here's the thing. You didn't draft him, okay, last year. You drafted him to be more than your RB9. Most people did, at least. They drafted him to be that top 5 running back, and he was kind of like the Austin Hooper of running backs last year, because we saw Austin Hooper finish as a top 7 or 8 tight end last year. He finishes a tight end 1, but he was like in my opinion, he was a very unimpressive tight end, and I'm a Falcons fan. He was a very unimpressive tight end 1, and that's kind of how David Johnson was to me as an RB1. Now, look, there's a lot of things he couldn't help. He was playing with a very unimaginative two unimaginative offensive minds in Byron Leftwich so far and Mike McCoy, excuse me. And they just didn't seem to try to get him involved in these ways that are best suited for a guy with the skill set of David Johnson. And it was very frustrating, as you and I mentioned a couple times last year. And it really upset a lot of people. But again, you look at him, you say, oh, he finishes RB9. They should have corrected their offensive line this year. They've got a more mobile quarterback. That's going to allow him to do a little more things on offense. They don't have a statue back there. So you can't, they've got an offensive mastermind. You would imagine a young offensive mind in Cliff Kingsbury coaching up the team. So now they're going to be much more unique, and they're going to get David Johnson the ball in so many different ways. And he's going to be so good. And he's a top 5 running back. I don't see it. I've got him as RB8 this year, finishing one spot ahead of where he was last year, but I don't see him as a top 5 running back. And that to me is a risk. That's very, very worrisome for me.
Yeah, and I understand that. The thing with David Johnson is if he's going to be what he can be, if he's going to be what we expect him to be, they need to be targeting him further down the field. If I'm Cliff Kingsbury, I'm going back to 2016 and I'm watching every single opportunity Bruce Arians gave David Johnson that year, and I am doing my best to replicate it. And one of the big things about that with Bruce Arians and David Johnson was David Johnson set a record in air yards usage that year. He saw 558 air yards. No other running back that year saw more than 228. That's all downfield usage. That's getting your best player the ball in space. David Johnson had a 19% target share that year. That's the kind of things we need to see. And I think that's what Cliff Kingsbury is going to want to do with a player as dynamic as David Johnson.
And we talk about Arizona's offensive line. Last point I want to make here. There is a certain very talented offensive lineman that is currently holding out right now. And there's been reports that he has said publicly he's not coming back, period. And that's Trent Williams, the tackle for the Washington Redskins. So it's going to be now the Redskins apparently have been telling teams, this was as of the August 12th, according to Adam Schefter, that they are not trading him. It's a standoff. I mean, that's pretty much, it's a Wild West standoff over there, Mark. So that's something to look at. Could the Cardinals be a team that say, look, we've gone through 4 preseason games now, and it ain't looking any better. We've got to get something to protect our prized possession in Kyler Murray. We traded our first-round quarterback last year for the first overall pick to get Kyler Murray. So now, what are we going to do? Are we just going to let him die behind this offensive line and let David Johnson continue to get stuffed at the line? And what are we going to do to patch this up at least a little bit? I think Trent Williams has got to be an option for them. And look, if Trent Williams is as sold on not returning as he sounds like he is, to me, the NFL being a business, it's time for the Redskins to just let him kick rocks and trade him to somebody and get something for him. And I think the Cardinals are a very, very good option. So I think they need to continue to be on the phone, if they haven't already, with the Redskins and see if they can bring him to town and help this offensive line. So we want to talk about, Mark, some top mid-round targets for you. This is really where we disagree on several of these guys. Let's start here with a team that's playing tonight as we speak, that actually doesn't look very good right now. Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida for the San Francisco 49ers. Let's talk about them. Let's discuss this offense, specifically those two guys. Where do you have those guys? Where should they be drafted? What do you think their outlook is for 2019?
So I want to start with Tevin Coleman. We're looking at RB27 for his ADP. I have him ranked about RB19, so I have him 8 spots above consensus. And I think that's completely fair. You're looking at a guy who does have system familiarity with Kyle Shanahan. His last season under Shanahan, before Shanahan went to coach San Francisco, 40 targets, 118 rushing attempts, so a grand total of 158 opportunities, well over 50 fantasy points over expectation. We talked about this on the last podcast. Fantasy points over expectation is going to tell you a number of things as far as how well the running back is performing with his opportunity. Like, is he just racking up what's blocked for him and going down? Is he finding space and making it through and scoring? Tevin Coleman was doing just that in Kyle Shanahan's offense because Shanahan knew how to use him. Tevin Coleman has elite straight line speed. You can get him the ball out in space. He's as dangerous and dynamic as anybody in football. That's why I love him as my RB2, or even you can get him as your RB3. I'm drafting Tevin Coleman everywhere. He is as big a value as we have at the position given his ADP.
It's interesting because we agree more on Matt Breida than we do Tevin Coleman here, because I've got Tevin Coleman actually as RB35. So he is kind of, he's going as RB27. So I've got him several spots back from the consensus because I like Matt Breida just a little bit more. I have Matt Breida is RB34. So they're very, very close for me, but Matt Breida is going as RB47. So this guy is literally free in 10-team leagues. In 12-team leagues, he's almost free. So I think this is a tremendous value. And we were talking before the show, we have seen this happen with these guys before. Not these guys specifically, but with running backs in a Kyle Shanahan backfield, most notably, again, Tevin Coleman, Devontae Freeman. So we have seen them support two fantasy-relevant running backs. Who's going to be the Freeman? Who's going to be the Tevin in this backfield remains to be seen. But look, I think for the value, I'm actually going Breida because if we're looking at ADP, which we've talked about with Tevin Coleman, there's a couple guys that I think I would actually rather have as my RB3. I think I would almost rather take the risk of look, he's my number 2 running back in the rookie draft, so it's not much of a risk for me. But I would almost rather have Miles Sanders over Tevin Coleman, especially in that offense, behind that offensive line with the healthy Carson Wentz. Austin Eckler is another guy. I think especially without Melvin Gordon, but with Melvin Gordon, he's going to have plenty of value in PPR. He's going to be a great value. I think he's going as RB30 right now, if I'm not mistaken. You've got Lamar Miller there. I think I would rather take the chance with Lamar Miller, to be honest with you. I kind of like Lamar Miller a little bit more than people. And of course, a guy we mentioned just a little bit ago whose stock is dropping like an anvil right now, Kenyon Drake is going as RB33. He's creeping in the 7th round right now. And a friend of mine just got him in the 11th round tonight. So Kenyon Drake is one of the biggest running back values, maybe the biggest running back value in fantasy right now, in my opinion. Darius Geis is a guy that I think you could argue with as well. And there's some other guys that I think you could throw in there. But Tevin Coleman, look, I don't hate the ADP, but there are a couple guys that me personally, I would rather draft ahead of him. But again, he's been in this offense. He's got familiarity with it, like you said. And Kyle Shanahan's going to use him. It just, we'll see how he uses Breida and Coleman and who ends up being the main guy there. So that's definitely something to look for. Do you believe that, I assume you do believe that Tevin Coleman is going to be the alpha dog in this backfield? Is that correct?
Tevin Coleman's going to be, I think he's going to get the first crack at starting. I didn't think they had an incentive to go out and sign Tevin Coleman when they had Matt Breida there.
Correct.
But I do think it's going to be closer to a true 50-50 split. If you're looking for an actual thunder and lightning, I think you need to look no further than Tevin Coleman and Matt Breida. There is so much running back opportunity in this offense. This backfield, the San Francisco backfield, ranked top 5 in yards from scrimmage last year. This was an incredibly productive backfield, even with San Francisco being as bad as they were.
And having a backup quarterback. I mean, people talk about the offensive line, backup quarterback, you had no other weapons on offense for the most part other than George Kittle. Like, that was impressive. That's an impressive stat.
You can really tell how much somebody watches football when they try and tell you that the offense was just as good with Nick Mullins on the field as it was with Jimmy Garoppolo. It couldn't be further from the truth. You look at air yards per target, you look at deep targets, it's not even close. Jimmy Garoppolo attempted 12 deep passes in 3 games. CJ Beathard and Nick Mullins combined attempted just 33 in 13 games. Those two combined only completed 10 passes of 20 yards or more. Jimmy Garoppolo completed 5 in 3 games. People can say what they want about Jimmy Garoppolo. He raises this offense's upside from a scoring perspective, from a yardage perspective, so much, it's not even funny. And that's why I want as many pieces of this offense as possible. And one more thing, Chris, before I throw this back to you, is I am comfortable drafting Matt Breida as well. I have him as my RB32 in my rankings. That's 15 spots above consensus. Just based on the raw opportunity alone, I will take both of these guys, no problem.
And going back to Jimmy Garoppolo real quick, this is for you guys that want to overreact on a pretty established player in the preseason. Jimmy Garoppolo tonight obviously did not have a very good night. 1 of 6, 0 yards, and an interception. He threw the ball. His first 5 passes were touched by Denver Broncos players. So, I mean, he didn't have a good night tonight, but that does not mean that he is going to be a bad quarterback this season or he's in for a down year. So don't go overreacting just because of the preseason. Look, I say all the time, preseason doesn't mean anything. But when I say that, I don't mean it doesn't mean anything for, rookies and guys trying to make the roster. It sure as hell meant something last year for guys like Phillip Lindsay, and it means something this year for guys like Preston Williams and other guys trying to make the roster. So, but for a team's success and for an offensive success, the preseason is not a great guiding light for you. Just because Arizona looked bad last week in the preseason doesn't mean they're going to be a horrible offense this season. So that it doesn't, again, it's not a very good guiding light to go off of. So don't panic on Garoppolo. Mark's exactly right. Garoppolo is going to be just fine. This offense is going to hum. As long as they can protect him, this offense is going to hum pretty well with him steering the wagon here.
Yeah, I mean, we have such a small sample of Jimmy G to work with. He's only started 10 games. So he started about half a season's worth of games with San Francisco. It's 2017. 8.8 yards per attempt in 2017. That's pretty substantial. We were talking about yards per attempt earlier with Baker Mayfield. And then in 3 games in 2018, 8.1 yards per attempt. Jimmy Garoppolo on a per attempt basis has been a very efficient quarterback. He needs to clean up that touchdown to interception ratio a little bit. Another thing I did notice on film is he takes an egregious amount of sacks, and that needs to stop. And those are things that he could absolutely clean up. Another quarterback that takes an unbearing amount of sacks is Deshaun Watson, who also has an egregious yards per attempt average. So I am not panicking on this offense at all, especially after what I've seen in the preseason. Jimmy Garoppolo has started 10 games. We need to treat him like he's a rookie because he just does not have that kind of experience yet. Even though we've been watching him for a few years, he doesn't have the experience yet.
Miles Sanders. You have him as RB26. I've got him as RB29. That's the next guy we want to discuss. What are your thoughts on Miles Sanders this year? He was my number 2 rookie running back behind David Johnson, right ahead of Josh Jacobs. He's my number 2 running back in this class for dynasty purposes. I love this guy. Look, and I like Jordan Howard. I think Jordan Howard's going to be a fine ADP value, but I think that Miles Sanders by the end of the season is going to be the clear-cut number 1 back. You have him as 26. You're a little bit higher on him this season than I am, which is actually kind of surprising to me because I feel like I'm a little bit more bullish on Miles Sanders than a lot of other people.
Like I said on the last episode we recorded, I'm disgustingly obsessed with Miles Sanders. His athletic profile is fantastic. 81st percentile straight line speed. He's got 76th percentile burst, 84th percentile agility score. And this is all per player profile. If you don't use this tool, if you're a dynasty player, I think you're missing out, but he's a phenomenal athlete. He was my second favorite running back in the draft. And even after the draft, he is still my 1.2 in dynasty behind David Montgomery. I like Josh Jacobs. He's a talented player. He's in a spot where he's going to get a ton of work, but I don't like the offense around him. I think that offense is still going to struggle. Whereas Miles Sanders is inheriting a very good offensive line, and it's only going to take a couple of weeks before he truly wedges a gap between him and Jordan Howard. Because as far as talent and ability is concerned, it's not close.
And here's another little nugget for people. Go back and look at his work at Penn State. He was every bit as effective as Saquon Barkley. Every bit. For all the love that we give Saquon Barkley, and we talk about Barkley, you and I agree, Barkley is the best running back overall in the NFL. Miles Sanders, there were some areas where Miles Sanders was even better than Saquon Barkley. And most of these areas, he was just as good and he kept pace with them. So Miles Sanders is a guy whose talent you should absolutely not overlook. He was a guy that can really do it all. Now he's got to clean up some things. He's got to clean up a little bit of pass pro because that's something that'll rip you off the field quick, fast, and in a hurry. There was also another thing. What are the 2 biggest things that will rip a running back off the field? Bad pass pro and bad ball security. Those are the 2 things that Miles Sanders really had to work on. Those were my 2 biggest negatives on him. But I liked him enough. He was so impressive to me on tape at Penn State that I was almost willing to look beyond that because I'm thinking, okay, well, he's going to get better. He's going to improve that. Running backs can improve that pretty easily. So he's going to improve that pass pro and that ball security. He does that, man. I'm telling you, Doug Peterson's going to have a tough time taking this guy off the field.
I agree 100%. I mean, Miles Sanders caught 32 passes in college. He was not some elite receiver out of the backfield, but he was more than serviceable. And he's somebody that can get even better at it by training under Doug Peterson, who in my opinion is one of the best coaches in the NFL today. This is a league winner. This is a league winner, and I'm going to be pushing him all season long. If there is a Nick Chubb in 2019, somebody who starts out slow because he's not getting as much opportunity as he deserves, and then
Miles
completely
Sanders
takes over completely takes over the backfield, it's Miles Sanders.
I was just getting ready to say that. I don't think he's going to come out of the gates just on fire like a Phillip Lindsay did or something last year, or like Saquon. I don't think he's going to do that. I think we're going to see him at a normal rookie pace, normal rookie production the first 5, 6, 7 weeks. But as they move closer to the playoffs, they are going to use him. I'm telling you, this guy is going to there's going to be a week, Mark. We don't know when it's going to be. Week 8, week 9, week 11, and all of a sudden, boom, we're going to be watching NFL Red Zone, and this guy is going to be going just bananas on whatever team he's playing at that point. So I think Miles Sanders is a guy that's just going to bust loose at any moment, and he's going to catch fire from here to the rest of the season. I think he's going to be a big reason why this team ultimately wins the Super Bowl.
I don't know if I would go that far, being that running backs don't matter. Can we get that? Can we get that alarm again? Can we get that alarm from last week?
I see what he did there. I love it.
Okay. But in all seriousness, Doug Peterson has never had a Miles Sanders. So we can look at his running back usage history. The best running back he's ever had as a head coach is Jay Ajayi, who could barely run with both of his knees. One of his knees. Did you ever see that video of him taking off on like a 39-yard touchdown run? It was one of his first games with the Eagles. He just couldn't run the way he used to anymore because his knees were so beat up. He ended up tearing the ACL in 2018. Miles Sanders is it. This is the guy we've been waiting for to get on the Eagles behind that generational offensive line. Miles Sanders is the talent that we've been waiting for. He is going to give Peterson no choice but to turn him into a bell cow.
And I was in during the scouting briefs this offseason when I was scouting him for the draft. A guy that really jumped off to me, the type of skill set he has, was LaShawn McCoy. And I compared him a lot, and not just because he was an Eagle. This was even before the draft. He really looks to me, the way he can just cut on a dime like LaShawn McCoy. We've always known LaShawn McCoy's cuts are just filthy. And that's really how Miles Sanders is. You think he's gonna tear an ACL every time you see him juke. This is a guy that's got a ton of talent. So look, I'm with you on that. I think right now, I don't think he's going to open the season as somebody who comes out of the gates, on fire. But as you and I think, seem to agree on that, he's going to be, if there is a Nick Chubb who's going to have a Nick Chubb sort of rookie season and catch fire later on the year, I think it is him. And, Chubb, I mean, he had that huge breakout game against the Falcons, and then he just never looked back. And now all of a sudden some people are talking about him as a top 8 running back. So I think you could be seeing the same thing with Miles Sanders, maybe even going into 2020. Okay, so if we're at the part of the show now, guys, if you got sick of Mark and I agreeing, this part of the show is for you, because we've got back-to-back-to-back guys where we are just miles apart on. So the first guy that I want to touch on, Mark, is Tyler Boyd. Now, this is a guy that obviously sort of, and look, I'm going to call it a breakout. I know a lot of people are saying, oh, he'll break out this year. I think he broke out last year, and this is a guy that I liked coming out of Pitt. I really liked Tyler Boyd, and I think he's talented. But you are a lot higher on him than I am. I guess I'm just playing more of the cautious card. And you by nature have been a little. We've known this working together for a while. Is you're a little bit more aggressive. You'll play the aggressive card. I want to play it safe. I want to stick with the consistency and the trends. You have no problem saying, boom, let's just go all in on a certain player. Tyler Boyd, I think, is one of those guys this year for you. Now, a lot of people will point to the fact he was better with A.J. Green. Now, A.J. Green may miss week 1, week 2 at the most, but he's going to be back. Do you still see him just picking up where he left off last year in 2018 and being that productive?
Of course. Tyler Boyd was fantastic last year. It's right there in our intro, honestly. It wasn't A.J. Green that correlated with Tyler Boyd's gross production, or his dip in production, rather. It was Andy Dalton. I mean, if I'm catching passes from Jeff Driscoll, I'm not going to be very productive either. You add to the fact your offense's best weapon is now pulled off the field because of an injury, it's only going to exacerbate the fact your offense is in shambles. And that's not Tyler Boyd's fault. It's not like he was bad with A.J. Green on the field. The offense as a whole was bad. One of those games where they had Jeff Driscoll under center and no A.J. Green, they only ran 44 plays. So it's not like he's going to see this gross target share when the offense is completely beat up. Now, I have Tyler Boyd ranked at wide receiver 18 in my rankings, wide receiver 24 ADP. He was Pro Football Focus's 11th highest graded receiver last year. He amassed 422 yards after the catch. That was 13th among wide receivers. He creates his own space. He's good. 127.8 passer rating when targeted. That was 6th among wide receivers. this was not a joke. This was a receiver that was a baller against both man and zone. He was good against everybody. And as long as he has Andy Dalton, his starting quarterback, on the field, he's going to be productive.
Does the new head coach, Zach Taylor, coming from the Rams, does that concern you at all? Because I think for people who are anti-Boyd, and I'm not really anti-Boyd, I'll take him. It's just I need him at the sweet spot. I need him at the right place. Having said that, I don't have any shares in 2019 so far. So is the head coaching issue with Zach Taylor, the offensive change, is that concerning to you? Because I think for some people it is. And I know people are going to say, well, Zach Taylor, coach, he was the offensive coordinator of the Rams, and look what they did. Sometimes it doesn't correlate like that. Are you somebody that believes that it will?
I think it could. I'm not going to be overly confident. I would rather be a little more pessimistic on the Bengals offense as a whole than I would be positive. But if there's going to be a shining light in this offense, it's going to be Tyler Boyd. You look at Zach Taylor and his resume, he just doesn't have... He was the Rams quarterbacks coach in 2018. He was the assistant wide receivers coach in 2017. And now all of a sudden he's a head coach. I think this is kind of a prime example of teams looking at another team's success and just trying to get a piece of that branch off that tree.
It's a copycat league. Yeah,
that's all they're doing. And we saw it with Cliff Kingsbury. We saw it with Matt LaFleur last year, and now he's a head coach. People are just trying to get as many pieces of that McVay tree as they can get. I don't know how it's going to work. I'm a little more pessimistic than I am optimistic as a whole about the offense. If I get a piece of it, and I want a piece of it, it's going to be Tyler Boyd.
He wants a piece of it, folks. All right, so moving on to Sammy Watkins here. He is the second guy. Now, this is obviously a player who, where do we begin with this? We got to go all the way back pre-draft when Tyreek Hill was going through this whole thing, and the tape recordings came out of him and his girlfriend about the punching his toddler, and all of a sudden now that's apparently not true, and now Tyreek Hill is in the clear, so Sammy is fading back into obscurity. Or is he? Where do you have him ranked? What do you think his outlook is for 2019?
So his current ADP is wide receiver 38. I have him ranked as the wide receiver 31, so 7 spots above consensus. If you're using my rankings to draft, I just posted them to FSA today, but if you're using my rankings to draft, you're probably going to end up with Sammy Watkins. You'll probably grab him maybe a round and a half before his ADP hits. He's an injury risk. I understand it. There's a very little chance he plays all 16 games. But now that we're finally getting him at that discount, we don't have to pay a 4th or a 5th round pick for Sammy Watkins. We can get him in the 9th round. Some things about Sammy Watkins. Number one, he's Patrick Mahomes' wide receiver too. Obviously, Travis Kelce is going to be second.
I was going to say, I don't know about that.
Travis Kelce is going to be second in the pecking order behind Tyreek Hill. But as far as wide receivers are concerned, in 2 wide receiver sets, which the Chiefs use a ton, they passed over 30% of the time out of 12 and 21 personnel last year. He's going to be the second wide receiver on the field next to Tyreek Hill. He had the highest passer rating when targeted among himself, Travis Kelce, and Tyreek Hill. A big part of that is ADOT. And like I've said before, they are turning Sammy Watkins into something of a possession receiver. His ADOT is notoriously lower under Andy Reid than it's been the rest of his career. And that's because he's so good in space. He's such a dynamic ball carrier. He had 8 avoided tackles on just 40 receptions. Kelce and Tyreek Hill only had 20 avoided tackles on 190 combined receptions. Now, I'm not saying Sammy Watkins is a better football player than Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill. That's ridiculous. I'm saying Andy Reid is using Sammy Watkins to his strongest abilities. He is getting the most out of Sammy Watkins. Watkins was also on pace for over 100 targets and 78 catches. I will take 100 targets in an offense quarterback by Patrick Mahomes. I'll take that in the 9th round any day of the week.
But is that going to happen, Mark? You just drafted Cole. You've got Carlos Hyde now, and I know you hate Carlos. He's not even in your top 60, I believe. But here's the thing: they've been using Carlos Hyde all over the field, especially in the passing game. So with Carlos and Cole, and you've got Tyreek Hill back. How much is there going to be for Sammy Watkins? That's the thing for me. And at the ADP, it is just unbelievable how people are still taking Sammy Watkins ahead of guys like Sterling Shepard, even ahead of Cortland Sutton, Emmanuel Sanders, who I think is being criminally undervalued, a guy that we started off the show with. Now, obviously, this guy's ADP is about to skyrocket past Sammy Watkins. Josh Gordon, Deshaun Jackson, who's in my opinion, I think he's going to be a great redraft option this year as well as a wide receiver 3 or 4 and a fantastic best ball option. But Deshaun Jackson, Golden Tate, who's suspended 4 games, who in my opinion is also criminally low at wide receiver 52 in ADP. So even missing, you talk about guys that are going to get suspended. Points per game is kind of what you want to look at from that point on. And I think Golden Tate's going to just blow the doors off of Sammy Watkins. Anthony Miller's a guy who I think is going to annihilate 2019. He's a big reason why I'm not very high on Allen Robinson. So for me, there are several guys that I'm just avoiding. Adam Humphries, wide receiver 60. I think he's going to be a target hog with the Titans this year, no matter who the quarterback is. Can people really justify Sammy Watkins over those types of names? I can understand guys like Marvin Jones, who he's going 3 wide receiver spots ahead of. You just got TJ Hawkinson. Even though Theo's gone, you just got TJ, and you look like you're gearing toward more of a run-heavy offense. I can understand guys like Marvin or Valdez Scantling or even DK Metcalf or Corey Davis. But, I mean, the guys that I named, can you really justify Sammy Watkins going ahead of these guys?
All right, Chris, let me ask you this. Let's just say, hypothetically, we can look into the future, and Sammy Watkins, we find out that Sammy Watkins is going to play 14 games, 100% healthy, and he misses, let's say, week 17 because he's a healthy scratch because the Chiefs are going to the playoffs, and he misses 1 before a bye week because he's banged up. But let's say he plays 14 games, 100%. Where would you feel comfortable drafting him?
I won't take him before. I don't want him as because I just don't trust the guy. I don't really care what the situation is.
Okay, let me clarify. Let me clarify that. So you don't trust him, the football player, or you don't trust the health risk?
I don't trust him really either, but I definitely don't trust the football player.
Okay, we are miles apart on this then. Miles apart.
I don't want him as any higher than my wide receiver 5. That's it. That's even if I'm like, yeah, I'll take Sammy Watkins, and I don't have a single Sammy Watkins share. You will find me with a Damian Williams share before you'll find me with a Sammy Watkins share. And again, even in that circumstance, Mark, I'm still going to take Emmanuel Sanders. I'm still going to take Sterling Shepard. I'm still going to take Golden Tate and probably Anthony Miller. These are guys to me, Josh Gordon, of course, and I think Deshaun Jackson's debatable, but I think with Carson Wentz, as long as he and Deshaun stay healthy, Deshaun Jackson, absolutely. Geronimo Allison's only going 1 wide receiver spot ahead of Sammy. Do I trust Geronimo Allison more? Yes. With Aaron Rodgers as his big slot receiver? Yes. Larry Fitzgerald? Yes. Curtis Samuel? Yes. D.D. Westbrook? Yeah. These are guys that are just barely going ahead of Sammy Watkins. All these names I've named, I don't care what the circumstance is. I trust those guys more than Sammy Watkins.
And I don't, because I really don't trust any of the players you just named. And a big part of that is offensive upside. Being part of the best offense in the NFL raises Sammy Watkins' ceiling so much. He's such a dynamic ball carrier. He's arguably the most elusive wide receiver in the NFL. He's right up there with Golden Tate and Odell Beckham Jr. as far as elusiveness is concerned. He creates his own space, and he's getting opportunity out there. He's getting opportunities in space so he can make defenders miss. He can shed those open field tackles. Andy Reid is using him perfectly. All we need is a clean bill of health, and you'll see it. I promise.
But that's one of the things. It's that opportunity, and we go back to not just the fact that I don't trust him, but the opportunity. Is it really going to be there like it could have been last year?
Yeah, absolutely.
Even with Mecole Hardman getting involved. I mean, they took Mecole Hardman pretty high in the draft. I don't think they're just going to take him and say, oh, Tyreek's back. I guess we just wasted that pick. They're going to use him. They're going to get him involved because I don't think that Mecole Hardman is much more than, I don't think he's ever going to be a consistent football player. I think he's going to be more of a Tavon Austin sort of gadget football player. Maybe even like a Cordell Patterson, not built as, more of a running back, obviously at this point in his career, but kind of like the Vikings used Cordell Patterson early on in his career. I just don't see the opportunity this season that Sammy Watkins had to take advantage of last year. And that, again, that's with a guy that you don't like in Carlos Hyde, and I think they're going to use him a lot more than people think. Darwin Thompson's another guy that I think a lot of people are sleeping on. If there's an injury or something, Darwin Thompson can really do it all. I don't think he's a great pass protector, but when it comes to catching the football, he's phenomenal, and he's great in space as well. They've got a ton of great space players, don't they? Again, it's just Sammy Watkins is not a guy that I can really put my full trust in. But before we jump off here, we got to touch on Vance McDonald, because that's another guy at a position we haven't even touched on tonight at tight end. This is a guy that you have very, very high, and I don't have nearly as high. We're more than 10 spots. There's more than 10 spots of separation for us. So where do you have Vance McDonald? What can people expect from Vance this year?
You know, Chris, I don't really like that you kind of had the last word on Sammy Watkins. I thought this was my rankings episode. You go back and watch, you go back and listen to the last episode. I'm pretty sure I let you have the last word, but no, it's fine. Don't worry about it. It's fine.
I had to. This is a guy that I've had in my crosshairs. Vance McDonald, what we got for him?
For anybody interested, I am looking for a new co-host. All right.
Podcast is canceled.
I got Vance McDonald. I have him at tight end 5. It's a bit aggressive, but it's not that far above consensus. He's being drafted as the tight end 8. The opportunity is there. What a lot of people aren't realizing, or at least aren't recognizing, is that Jesse James is gone. That opens up 40 targets worth of tight end usage. Not just like wide receiver, downfield usage. Like Antonio Brown's usage is probably not going to be absorbed by Vance McDonald. It's going to be distributed to Dante Moncrief, to James Washington, amongst others. But this is tight end usage. This is snap share and target share that there's really only Vance McDonald to absorb. Vance McDonald ranked 15th out of 40 qualified tight ends in yards per route run at 1.48 last year. That was pretty freaking good. He had the 4th highest passer rating when targeted, and he was 2nd in avoided tackles behind just George Kittle. 3rd most yards after the catch at the position. He's a good football player that's never quite received the opportunity.
And I agree with you on that at that point. He's a good football player that's never really received the opportunity. Here's the thing that a lot of people are looking at who are high on Vance McDonald, and I don't know if this is if you fall into this category yet, because we haven't talked about the other wide receivers outside of Juju that much. But a lot of people are like, Antonio Brown's gone. So Juju Smith-Schuster is now Antonio Brown. He's going to have 400 million yards for 37,000 touchdowns. And now you got the wide receiver, too, who's going to have all this target, these leftover targets from Antonio Brown to get. I am very, very huge on James Washington. I'm very, very huge on Dante Moncrief. And I'm also very huge on Vance McDonald. Well, then you got to have Ben Roethlisberger as QB1, because somebody's going to suffer here. And I don't see an established, and I know it's been a while since it's happened, so it is a risky plank for me to walk on, but I don't see a weekly consistent wide receiver 2 in this offense, and I just don't know if I trust Vance McDonald, and not only that, trust Vance McDonald enough to draft him ahead of guys like even O.J. Howard, a healthy Greg Olsen, Eric Ebron, Mark Andrews, who most people, including myself, have as a breakout tight end this year, Trey Burton, David Njoku. I mean, do we really trust Vance McDonald, even given the target share, the opportunity that he might have? Do we trust him to essentially take over that number 2 wide receiver spot?
Yeah, I trust him because the opportunity is finally going to be there. He only played 70% of the snaps or more once all last year. He played less than 50% of the snaps 7 times. There's no viable option behind him now at the position. His snap share is going to increase drastically. There's no doubt in my mind. And like I said on the last podcast, snap share has the largest correlation to fantasy production there is. It's the biggest correlation you're ever going to find, except for maybe Scott Barrett's actual opportunity, but that's neither here nor there. Vance McDonald is in an absolute smash spot. He's a good athlete that's never really had this opportunity before. That's why I trust him. This is going to be a high-volume passing offense. Ben Roethlisberger threw for over 5,000 yards last year. What else do they have? I don't trust James Washington at all. You keep talking about trust. I don't trust James Washington to be anything. I have him ranked outside my top 50. Dante Moncrief, I think he's going to be a great situational wide receiver too. He's not somebody I would be counting on as my wide receiver 2 every week. He's going to be a big matchup-based play. And I mean like cornerback matchup-based play, because I think the way Randy Fichtner is going to be scheming them around, Juju's going to find the easier matchups unless he draws a shadow.
I can get on board with all this because you're not telling me James Washington is going to be a top 28 wide receiver or Dante Moncrief for that. I mean, for the people that are saying that, and they're also that high, almost that high in Vance McDonald, to me, it just doesn't come into focus that way. I don't think that offense is going to be hitting on all cylinders like it used to. I do see a bit of a step back this year for that. I've got Ben Roethlisberger as QB 18 this year. I think there's a step back on that offense, not necessarily the running game for the most part, but I think that passing game is going to start to take a step back now without Antonio Brown. And I'm not even the hugest Brown fan, but I still, obviously recognize the talent and the production that he brought for that team. So look, it is risky, but again, I can get on board with that because you're not also one of those guys that's also super high on Dante Moncrief and James Washington. Guys, it has been a blast. Episode 4.
Oh, you're gonna do it again? You're just gonna cut me off and end the show?
I'm gonna get the final word again. All right,
I'm done.
We're gonna give Mark the final word here on Vance McDonald because my agreement is not enough. Mark, give the final word on Vance McDonald. What else do you have for us? You're just oozing data on Vance McDonald tonight.
Yeah, I was prepared for Vance McDonald, and that's why I'm drafting him where I'm drafting him. I have Ben Roethlisberger at QB 10, so I do have him being productive, but I don't have him throwing for 5,000 yards again. I have Vance McDonald at tight end 5, Juju at wide receiver 4. I did bump him down to wide receiver 4 so I could move Odell Beckham Jr. up. I have Dante Moncrief at wide receiver 42. I'm 100% taking him over James Washington. I genuinely think James Washington ain't it. I don't think he's going to be very good at football. But that's where I'm at. I could see Vance McDonald being second on the team in targets, and this is a high volume passing offense. Whether they're winning, losing, or in a neutral game script, Randy Fichtner wants to throw. And I don't think that's going to change. I don't think it's going to change.
Yeah, and I like I said, I can't really argue that. I think that's actually very sound rationale there. Guys, it's been an excellent show, and I mean it this time. It's been an excellent show. We are wrapping up episode 4, but before we do, of course, as always now, a little thing that we have begun to do, it is time for the producer man, Joe Pollock, to tell us what we got wrong and where we screwed up. Producer man, what you got for us?
Just a few things here, guys. Josh Gordon wasn't targeted more than 5 times in a game until week 6 versus KC, not week 5 versus Indy. The Cardinals had 4 picks in the top 65 in 2019, not 5. And Mark, I think it's safe to say you're not going to be a very productive receiver with Jeff Triskel or Andy Dalton throwing you the football. Great show, gentlemen.
Thank you so much, producer man. We will get better. We promise. We can't be perfect all the time. Mark, again, where can the people find you?
Chris, are we allowed to swear on this podcast? Because that producer man's a real.
I think we can. I think we could put a censor beep in there, right?
It might be a good idea to censor that. We've got kids listening to the show, but hey, you can find me on Twitter at Mark Wemken. That's MarkWemken. Chris, where are we going to find you? As if anyone cares.
You can find me on Twitter at Mind of McConnell. You can also find the both of us in many places now. First of all, you can find us at FSA Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis, the fastest growing, most active year-round fantasy sports community. Notice I didn't just say fantasy football, fantasy sports community, because we cover it all year-round. I'm telling you, it's an absolute blast. You will love it. Go to Facebook, type in FSA Fantasy, click to join. We will personally accept your request, and you will have a blast and join the FSA family, the official podcast of FSA Fantasy Sports Advice and Analysis. You can also find us here on the RotoBros Fantasy Football Podcast, but not just on Podbean anymore. You can find us on all the major platforms: Google Play Music, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and also Apple Podcasts. So click, listen, subscribe, share, and most of all, learn. Guys, again, it's been a fantastic show. Thanks for hanging out with us, guys. For Mark Wemken, I'm Chris McConnell, and as always, guys, keep balling, baby.